tech reporter. This is probably, my third time moderating a panel at Herbivore. Love it here. We're going to talk about fleets and sort of the possibilities of transportation and delivery beyond the standard four-wheel drive that America is very well known for. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. Would you like to start? We can go this way.
First of all, just want to say thanks to Herbivore for hosting the event. My name is Ain McKendrick. I'm the CEO and founder of Faction. And at Faction, we work on driverless light electric vehicles, so less than car size for doing this. One of my running jokes is that bringing any of us a pizza in a 4,000-pound electric vehicle with 300 miles of battery range is a little bit of overkill. And so prior to getting into the light electrics, I was actually on the completely opposite end of the spectrum doing driverless semi-trucks a few years back, where I led engineering at a company called Starship Robotics. So logistics and fitting the payload to the mission has actually been, the vehicle to the mission, has been one of my passions for the last few years. And so I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about what we're doing.
Hi everyone, I am Keerthi, not Ellen Kennedy. Sorry about that, but Ellen had to stay with her son this week. But I work at RMI, we're a climate think tank, and my work specifically focuses on micromobility and equitable charging infrastructure. And I work very closely with Ellen on that. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi everybody, Neider, VP Business Development for Starship Technologies. I lead the US business for Starship. Also want to thank Herbivore for having us. We've got one of our robots right here to your right of the stage, my left. So we want to revolutionize last mile logistics. I use the example of a pizza. We use the same one, except a burrito. Why use a 4,000 pound vehicle to deliver a 1 pound burrito? It's a big burrito. When you could use something way more efficient, better for the environment, better customer experience at the last mile. So we're here to revolutionize that and share what we're seeing, how we're seeing the world from a robot's perspective.
Great. Speaking of robots, so my name is Arielle. I work at Waymo, which is an autonomous vehicle technology company. Very excited to be here for today's conversation. My focus at Waymo is policy development and research, so I really like my job because I get to ask big questions. So we get to think about how can we roll out our technology to meet the needs of cities, of states, and federal government with respect to things like congestion or equity or data sharing. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about these big meaty questions and working with external partners to deliver answers. I'm very excited for today's conversation.
Okay, so speaking of delivering burritos and pizzas and giant cars, I want to talk about last mile delivery, which is that we know we get cargo ships from one country to another country, and then the payload gets smaller, and the vehicle is supposed to get smaller, the destination gets smaller until we get to that burrito that needs to go to exactly one person. Chris, can you tell me a little bit about Starships and kind of, the idea of right-sizing fleets and what that even means?
Yeah, right-sizing fleets. Well, first I want to talk about kind of the focus. I think you and I had a good conversation about this, is delivering that end customer experience. So at Starship, we really put that front and center because we are not making the burrito, we're not making the coffee, it's not our product, right? It's somebody else's product that the end customer has ordered. So we have to ensure through that entire experience and chain that end customer experience is what the Starbucks of the world, what the burrito place of the world want it to be for their end customer, otherwise we all lose in that experience. So that's an important factor when you think about right-sizing a fleet. Something to know is we're not sending 5 robots to the Starbucks and 8 to the burrito place and 10 to the pizza place, right? It's a network of robots in a designated service area. And that's way more efficient because you might be picking up at one place and dropping off at another, and you can use that fleet, right, to the network effects that it creates to have the robots at the right place at the right time with a whole bunch of incredible technology behind the scenes, routing all of this magic and ETAs and orders to the restaurant. So when you think about right-sizing the fleet, it's understanding the service area that you're addressing, right? The demand in that service area, and then the expectation and the promises that you've made to deliver that coffee in under 15 minutes, that order in under 30 minutes, right? And understanding each of those components to have the right mix of robots, right, in the right place at the right time, so that you and I, who are placing the order, are getting that experience that we're seeking and that we're promising to you.
And you do something kind of similar, right? Can you talk a little bit about maybe the difference? I know he's on sidewalks. Be scared to put that guy on an LA road. You're on roads.
That's great. And actually, in full disclosure, Chris and I actually share a similar investor even. So I think when you look at investors, they look at small, medium, large, and how do you look at the entire ecosystem. And I think for a lot of us who are on this mission, our job is to think about how we get rid of the car as one size fits all for everything, and think about mixed mobility in urban centers. And so if all of us do our jobs right, it increases the quality of life for all of us. But you do need to have these layers for how you do it. And so to your point about last mile and the whole supply chain, the last mile is actually the most expensive part of the supply chain. It's where companies spend the most money. And 64% of the cost is actually fuel and driver wages for doing this. And so if you can attack that with technologies such as automation as well as electrification, it has a massive impact not only on the businesses, but also us as consumers in terms of the end customers here. But the reason we stuck with the roads was because a lot of the customers that are willing to pay for this technology, time is the most important metric. And so all of us that build the tech, we geek out around our camera systems and the AI and how do we make these things efficient and everything else. But when you go to sell this to a customer, the metrics are literally time. That's all they really care about. And so if you can show that you can improve a business's operations and make a better experience for their customers, they're in. But they're going to hold us to a time metric. They're not going to hold us to a technology metric. And so it's time and cost is what really matters for them. And if you can fit your business model the way Starship has done it with smaller radiuses, and we can fit it with the medium-sized radiuses, then there's business for both, right? And so we really think the sweet spot for Faction is about 3 to 5 mile delivery radiuses in urban centers. Our vehicles can do up to 100 miles of range, but this would be, for very specific use cases. We like to turn the vehicles more frequently. It's more profitable to do that. And of course, if you do have to go longer range, there's driverless cars and trucks that would do that. And so mixed mode is really, I think, where the future is going to be.
Who are your customers? I feel like you guys operate in like different realms here.
So for us, when we first started, and this was by design, we went after B2B customers. So the business customers are the ones that we could operate hub and spoke. Our first customer in the Bay Area was a commercial bakery. And every morning they had to deliver to hotels, coffee shops, restaurants. It's the milk runs, the stuff you have to do repeatedly. And so we love those models because they're great for automation. The next phase for us, and we're going to be launching new markets this year, is where we start to do B2B2C. So this is where we would stage at a corporate location, but now it's actually going out to end customers as well. But we will work those within a geofence radius, because that's where we can be most efficient. The one, I think, pitfall for a lot of the companies that we're doing automation over the last few years, and especially autonomy in general, everyone got enamored by the technology and went all in to try to build really expensive, exotic vehicles with, cool features and capabilities, but they hadn't really found a business model that was working. For all of us on this kind of second wave of automation and autonomy, the business model is critically important. And this is not only for building your business, but as startup companies, you're also fundraising on a regular basis, and your investors want to see everything. It's the tech, business model, as well as customers signing up. And so you do have to pick the unfair fights that work for your business, and that's why I think there's room for all of us, because there's a lot of different approaches, and there's lots of segments of the ecosystem.
Actually, I consider Waymo to be one of the first big major players in the automotive space, or I guess in autonomous vehicle space. What you said about kind of the first generation vehicles and what they've learned from working with cities or working with states. Can you talk to me a little bit about Waymo's journey to where they are now and how you've kind of come to LA in this partnership?
For sure. It's really interesting hearing all these conversations around delivery and the vehicles, and it's also making me a little hungry. Let's talk about burritos. So Waymo's been around now for, since 2016 is when we got our start, and we initially started in Phoenix. And around 2019, in scaling our operations there in 2020, started in San Francisco at around 22. We started in cities with an early rider program or a trusted tester program with the goal of learning, understanding, getting that really crucial feedback from our initial set of riders on everything from kudos to the driving experience to, the technology. Really trying to get that initial early feedback. So it's not always just about the technology, but also again about that experience in the car. So we've been doing paid rides in San Francisco since August of 2023, so pretty recently. And recently we just announced that we are expanding to Los Angeles, which is super exciting. Folks, we just had a car here. I don't know if folks got to see it. These very ubiquitous white Jaguars that will be here in LA. We just kicked off, like I said, so what we call RO, rider only, in 63 square miles of Los Angeles from Santa Monica to downtown. We operating 24/7, and we are letting people in essentially in batches. Something that is really important to Waymo as part of our scaling journey is that gradual and incremental approach, both in line with our safety framework, taking a really rigorous approach to safety evaluation and letting that guide our scaling, but also local communities. Right now in Los Angeles, we are permitted to do a much larger area than we actually are, right? That 63 square miles, again, is just a really small set of what we have the permission from our regulators to do. But part of, like I said, our mission and our model is that gradual, is that scaling, both with safety and our local communities in mind. It's a big piece, again, of how we think about our operations. And lastly, we also are in Austin. We are doing our rider-only operations there with the goal of accepting passengers by the end of the year. So very exciting to be in 4 cities, really scaling and growing, finding that business model that really works, to bring what we think is very exciting and safe technology to the public.
So I know, I read RMI's, like their last mile delivery report, and like you all mentioned, it is like very environmentally expensive, and just like plain old expensive, that last mile part. I'm curious to know, like, from the perspective of couriers and cities, how is automation in the last mile space? Like, how do they take that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we didn't focus on AVs because the scope of our project was very much centered around the courier experience. So what barriers they're facing to shifting to cleaner modes. And obviously we adopted a very mode agnostic approach to our work, but at the end of the day we advocate for clean, efficient modes and supporting infrastructure. I think we did hear from some stakeholders in some cities mention that maybe I can throw this back to our other panelists here, but they mentioned that they've noticed that usually AVs in the last mile delivery space are not the best at the 5 to 10 feet, the last 5 to 10 feet of the delivery. And so they sort of were saying that a potential solution to incorporate both couriers and AVs in the conversation is to think about how maybe AVs can focus on the shorter distances delivery, last mile deliveries, and then have couriers focus on the longer distance deliveries. And that way there's sort of, I don't want to frame it as job loss, but it's sort of shifting the type of jobs couriers do, and also that's also incorporating any sort of earnings potential loss that cities or other stakeholders might be worried about in this transition.
Actually, I had a comment around that, because I think one of the most important parts about it is picking the right battle for where you're going to apply these technologies. And the reality is, I get asked all the time who my competition is, and people are expecting me to say, oh, it's one of the other big names in autonomy. But the reality is, the competition for us doing last mile curbside is going to be a gig worker type service or a courier service, because they actually set the market. It's about $2 a mile. So if you can't deliver curbside for about $2 a mile, you're probably a research project. And so you have to fit the cost of your system. So all in, when we started building the faction vehicles, we knew they had to be around a $35,000 vehicle. If you went over that, you couldn't make the economics work. At the same time, you have to pick your right kind of customers and your partner businesses. So we want to turn a vehicle about 30 to 60 times a day, minimum, to be profitable with that vehicle system. And so sometimes we'll have customers show up that they have a really fun use case, but if they only turn the vehicle 10 times a day, they're probably not our customer. They're probably better off with a courier. So I think it's going to depend on where you want to apply these things. But cost is something you have to take into account, because especially we're notorious in the technology industry. Every time an engineer shows up and says, I'm an engineer by training, so yeah, self-deprecating joke. But every time an engineer shows up and says, wouldn't it be cool if, right? You got to listen real careful, because that might lead you down a path that it could get pretty expensive. So.
Yeah, and I'll also add one thing to this topic or this conversation is, I think it's really important to consider the local context and understand what the community needs. So again, when we say we're mode agnostic, we're trying to get across the point that It's important to engage everyone who's using the road, who's using the vehicles, who's interacting with the AVs to understand what is needed and cater solutions based on that. And that way you can have a more full user experience understanding than just sort of focusing on one mode and then ignoring other modes. So yeah, that's sort of our perspective on the topic.
Arielle, to her point about you need to understand the local context, what goes into working with another city or county or something like that? Like, what kind of conversations do you need to have with the proper players?
That's a great question, and I'm sure you guys have to do something similar. So at Waymo, we are regulated at the state level, but from the earliest start, we have recognized the need, really the imperative of building those relationships with local stakeholders. And so my team, I like to note that we have a local policy team. Many companies have a state and local team, and we have a completely separate local policy team, again, recognizing the imperative of really building those deep relationships with local stakeholders. So my colleague Adam, who I think had to leave, but he's our local policy, our government relations person for Los Angeles, and you live here, you have any questions, he's your person. He's works closely with LA stakeholders to understand needs, expectations, make sure they understand the technology as well. And we repeat that really in every city we go to. And it's not just when we land in the city, it's months, years prior to really starting those relationships, making sure that these stakeholders understand who we are, what we're doing, and why. And it's not just about the policy stakeholders. We have a robust public affairs team that also works in community. My colleague Alexander Hall, who's phenomenal, getting out there, helping communities understand who we are, in particular working with our disability communities to get them access to the technology. So it's really about doing that robust outreach and engagement up front and then sustaining it all the way through. Also note too, I mentioned our Trusted Tester program, so bringing people, riders into the program, making them feel a part of it. In Los Angeles, some of you might have experienced, we did the Waymo One tour. It was very cool. We were in different parts of the city. We did about 15,000 trips, which is a lot of trips in these little pockets of the city. Getting people that early experience, an early opportunity to ride with Waymo, experience the technology, and provide that really critical feedback.
And I'll speak to that as well from the sidewalk perspective. There was a panel this morning and somebody was talking about, tech bros and the old model of just bringing technology to town and deal with it. I can tell you that that's not our policy, and I know none of us have taken that approach because we've understood from the beginning that if you do not have that community as a partner, if you do not have that leadership as a partner, you're not only going to ruin it for yourself, you're going to ruin it for everybody. And so that's something, we have a dedicated public affairs team. Every city, every state, and every place that we operate has a little bit different nuance, right? We've helped get laws passed in about 25 states that are advantageous to PDDs, personal delivery devices on the sidewalks. But then every town that we're in, right, has a community government that we partner with before we bring these robots to town. Because a lot of them have been burnt by all the scooters that were just dropped off and left in sidewalks. So there's usually some of those early conversations of, no, don't worry. Robots have a home. They go home at night. They're not just going to stay on your sidewalk and run over little children. That will not happen, I promise. And educating them. And then you've got a partner. And then if and when something does come up, guess what? You're getting a call. You're talking about it. You're working on how do we, fix this curb cut area that, is really bad for those with mobility challenges. So there's lots of opportunities other than just bringing somebody a coffee or a burrito. Right, to make the community better, to build great partnerships for technology.
And I'll also add to that quickly. Waymo has been one of the best actors in the space, and I think because Waymo's been at it for a while, they've actually helped a lot of us who are one of the second wave, of companies coming into the autonomy, because you've already kind of paved the path a little bit. And even before I got into last mile, when I was doing long-haul trucking, my previous startup, we'd actually co-sponsored legislation with Waymo in states like Georgia and Florida and others, and a lot of southern states, to kind of stand up together as an industry and say, we're here to work with government and make sure that we can do our jobs properly. And in fact, regulation, even though it's a little bit early in this category, I think a lot of us welcome it because it helps to set the guidelines that we can all play within. And same thing at Faction, when we first started operating on the roads in California, We're technically a motor carrier, so we have our DOT number, California DOT number, we move goods and services, we had DMV on site, CHP, give them demos, when we went to Arizona and Nevada, and then now we're going into Texas next. You get in there ahead of time and you let them know you're coming, and you work with regulators. It's the no surprises rule on both sides. If we are good actors, that's how we're gonna get permission to run. And as Chris pointed out, it's the companies that try to cheat the rules and try to think they're gonna get in there and do something different. They're the ones that always end poorly. And I know none of the companies up here aspire to be those types of companies.
Yeah, just to bring it back to the courier perspective and connecting that with AVs and couriers, but I think couriers are on the roads right now, and we have an opportunity to sort of signal to people who are not in the last mile delivery business to say, hey, look, if couriers can safely operate electric modes on the road, others can do it too. I think it's a really massive opportunity to signal that decarbonization is very possible, and couriers are on the road right now. So obviously that's not without challenges. There's charging infrastructure barriers, battery swapping needs to become more readily available for two-wheelers to have a more successful modal shift. Road safety infrastructure has to come into play as well, but yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to start with last mile deliveries and then signal to the larger population that this is possible.
Actually, that is what my next question. What are the barriers to entry of getting couriers to adopt these newer electric vehicles? Like, what needs to happen in that space in order to get them to be okay with that?
Yeah, for sure. Based on the research we've done, we've spoken to a lot of couriers in a lot of different geographies. The most common barriers that have come up have been charging infrastructure. Even for couriers that have shifted to electric modes, they need better battery swapping infrastructure along routes that they're delivering on. We spoke to couriers in Seattle who already drove electric vehicles, cars, and they would run out of charge mid-delivery or something. And so it has to be affordable, it has to be accessible, sort of building some sort of charging corridors along famous delivery routes is a feasible solution. And the other barrier is the upfront cost. So we really need good financial incentives to help couriers purchase, and not just purchase, lease, rent modes that will be cleaner modes. And then the last one is road safety, like I mentioned, is very important. I think couriers have to know that if they're going to switch to different modes, so if they're going to switch from a car to an e-bike, can they safely deliver? Can they do that? Can they be on the roads and deliver on time, deliver safely? Do they have the education? So local orgs can come into play where they provide education on how to operate these modes, where they provide education on if their electric vehicle needs maintenance, where can they go? They can't go to a regular mechanic. They might have to go to a certified mechanic. So where are those solutions for them? So those are sort of the barriers, and I put in some solutions in there as well.
That makes a lot of sense. In the last mile delivery space, I know you are, what, 85% autonomous? What does the 85 account for? Why can't it be like, why can't couriers just use it?
Well, is there our vehicle? Well, we can hire couriers actually, because we're a dual mode kind of operation. When I say we're about 85% autonomous, this is to get on the right side of the economics. So our vehicles are what are known as supervised autonomous vehicles. So while they're highly automated and they can follow their paths and do their jobs, when they encounter things that would be kind of variables, whether it's a double parked car or a construction zone, we're not going to leave it to chance with an AI system to try to make the right decision. We alert our operations center, and a human will supervise the vehicle. The human may direct the vehicle to go around the obstacle and get back on mission. Or sometimes our AI system might actually make a suggestion, and the human says, oh, that's good, we'll take that, and then allow it to go and do its job. It's about workload reduction, because getting to 100% AI is a very expensive proposition. Companies have spent billions of dollars on trying to get there. I would say Waymo was one of the first movers that had very deep pockets to go after this, but it puts you in this kind of research mode where you're trying to build this 100% driving system. While we care about that efficiency, our end customer doesn't give a damn. They want time and cost. And so by being about 85% autonomous, this means we're about one operator to every 5 vehicles. That's in an urban area. On highways, you're more like 1 to 10 or more, so the blended mix actually still puts you on the right side of it. But the reality here is the vehicles, you have to think of them like driving robots. They stay in the lane, they don't hit things, but then what will happen is if you can do this, you can prove it to regulators that they operate safely and the vehicle does its job. But then you've got humans in the loop to assist them on occasion. And I think this is the model that allows us to scale now, not like 10 years from now, waiting for 100% AI assistance. And even the companies that have been putting a lot of money into the AI research, they all have a level of remote assistance in here to do it. So when I quote the 85% autonomous number, that's usually, I also use that for investors. It's like, we don't have to go spend $1 billion to get there. We're now talking billions to get there if you just embrace this. But one other really important part about this is when you think about the right-sized vehicles, we have to do this. While you look at the amazing vehicle that Waymo brought today, Waymo showed up to me tomorrow and said, hey, we'll license you everything. You can have it all for free. I physically couldn't fit most of their equipment on our class of vehicle, and we couldn't run at the same power levels. And so someday Waymo may have a system that when it's ready, I will gladly license it. But that's one of the things that I think when we look at it as an industry, there's going to be different technologies you apply to different levels of the infrastructure.
Yeah, we're at 99%, and that's intentional, right? We're on the sidewalk traveling at 5 to 6 to 7 miles per hour. So, slowing down for an object that's in front of you, a little different than being on the road and a little different than at 25, 35, 45 miles per hour. So for us, it is this intention, exactly as Ain said, is the ability to, when you see something out in the world, you need that human operator to help you decide what to do next. Or just say, oh, yes, you can go around it to the right versus the left as these systems get better. The world is so dynamic that you cannot, from our perspective, program for everything and have that 100% level of confidence that it's going to be able to solve and answer every single question. And especially on universities where we're mainly focused here on the US. I mean, they're doing construction all the time. Things are changing. Game day shows up, and all of a sudden you have 100,000 people flood a university. You've got to turn certain parts of the campus off. You have certain streets that all of a sudden became unavailable. And that just, you don't program that into an autonomous system. There's still, don't worry, the humans are still going to be involved, guys. The robots are not taking over. And there's a big team behind all the magic that you see from all of us.
I would just say Waymo is L for autonomous technology, so really higher up on that scale, but it is an ecosystem approach, and to your point about right-sizing, we do have a purpose-built vehicle that is coming online, but it is a challenge of being able to, I think as an urbanist, I would love to have like that little two-seater, right? That I don't need to go, I don't need a full car when I need to just go to the grocery store or go to Mom or Grandma's house, but it's harder than it sounds to be able to really change all the sensors and the LiDAR, and I say that just I think to keep expectations in check and also not let this perfect be the enemy of the good, right? At the end of the day, Waymo is accessible, it is all electric, it is safe, and so while it might not be the teeny car that we really need for grandma's trips, we are hitting in on those other places as well.
Speaking to what Keerthi said about the road safety issue, Faction's vehicles, I mean, that looks scary to drive, as a person on a road in LA. It looks like a giant, like a skeleton, basically. Where does automation come into play for that? How do you square what the courier does today and what they, I guess, are too scared to do right now because of the situation that they have to operate in?
I encourage everybody to go take a look at the vehicle we brought today, and you'll see what Keerthi's referring to. But one thing I'll mention about that vehicle is made by a company called Arcimoto, who's one of our OEM partners. When Faction first started, our goal was to go work with OEMs that built these alternative format vehicles. And so we work with them to develop our technology on top of those vehicles. It allows us to scale a little bit faster, but then we can also work with those companies to open up new markets for themselves. And our goal is really to work with, and we have multiple partners we're currently engaged with right now. Even a few years ago, we were working with Electromechanica that made a vehicle called the Solo that was a single occupant vehicle that you could drive yourself on the highway even, but it had power windows and air conditioning, but it was technically regulated like a motorcycle because it was light electric. I would say that the United States in general, we're incredibly far behind the rest of the world when you think about mixed mode fleets. If you look at India, Asia, Europe, they all have these alternative vehicles that might be little three-wheelers, or in Europe, I love the L6 quadricycle, they call it. They're very cool. They're like these little four-wheel vehicles that might be these two-seaters. And if I can shamelessly put in a plug for Waymo, I love the Fireflies. When the very first vehicles that Waymo did were these small little electrics designed for only a couple people. And as Americans, if you leave it up to us to buy vehicles, we're the worst in the world. We buy the biggest vehicle, the longest range, and we park it 90% of its life. And so we're horribly inefficient. For the small vehicle we brought today, you could build 9 of those for one Hummer EV when you think of the materials that go into the vehicle. And so in the urban centers, if we're willing to get bold at some point where we start to ban cars from our urban centers, and this is happening already in Europe and other areas, you can start to use these other vehicles to get around. They'll actually be cheaper, more efficient, and actually right-sized to the mission, both for mobility as well as delivery use cases. And so I think we need to change our thinking in the US that if you don't have to go from here to, let's say, Santa Monica, take something small. If you do need to take a longer road trip, sure, get a bigger vehicle. The Jaguar I-Pace is fantastic if you need to go 50 miles. If you need to go 2 or 3 miles, it might be a little overkill. We might be a little overkill. So I think it's really about thinking mixed mode for the future, and if we can get regulators to work with us on this and actually start to push this agenda, all of us win in the end. And we also get these new innovative formats we can use for vehicles.
Something I would just add on that I think is really important. It doesn't always come down to the vehicle. So Waymo, as my colleague Adam talks about it, shared mobility is a team sport, and I like to say, which is true, that I work for Waymo, so I never have to get in one. I work for it because of the promise of safe streets, and I want to walk and bike with my kid everywhere. So we can get at what we want, that idea of right-sizing with our vehicles as they are, because by making our streets safer, I hope that we can really start to see more mode shift, getting people out of their cars because they feel safer walking and biking in their cities.
Chris, I want to talk to you about last mile again. What the courier does and what you guys do. I feel like you're not on the road either. So that road safety issue that couriers face, that doesn't really apply to Starships really. But what is Starship trying to fix in that last mile space? Even that couriers do, even if it's not like impacting road safety.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think we'll start at the top of the line, which is the 4,000-pound vehicle to bring you the Starbucks drink, right? That's overkill. So we talk about emission savings, right? We've helped reduce 4 million pounds of CO2 just by doing those deliveries that a big vehicle could have done. So you think about being good and clean for the environment. Talk about delight, right? So having a cute little robot show up to your door to bring you something you like. I mean, we've got pictures on walls at every hub of people putting stickers and kids when we do home deliveries, right, drawing robots into colorful things they want to send back in the robot to the hub, and also price point. So I'm also a consumer of delivery pretty regularly. No robots in my neighborhood, unfortunately. So I have the classic courier delivery that comes to my house. I do tip. I'll just make that known here. I do tip couriers. But I don't want to tip as much when it's coming from the restaurant that's a mile away that I probably should have or could have walked to. Now I got 2 kids, so I don't have the time to get there. So that robot can bring me that delivery in a cost-effective, safe, cute way that a courier can't. Now I do want to tip the courier more when it's coming from further away. So one of the questions we usually get is, are you going to take all these jobs away from the couriers? Well, most couriers don't want to do those because most people aren't tipping for those very short deliveries, right? Their mode of transportation is more suited for the stuff that's farther away. That's far away, so I'm more than happy to tip more for that thing that came a great distance. So there is this world where I see each of these components playing a meaningful part. And we're traveling on the sidewalk, right? The design is very deliberate. If you come stand next to it, right, it's about shoulder width apart. You get out there and you see other robots, bigger and all different sizes. That's because we knew this thing had to live on the sidewalk with you, more importantly, your kids, right? And if your kids are scared, well, parents aren't going to be too happy about that. We started in Estonia, we started in neighborhood delivery. So from the beginning, that's where we had to design it. We're now here in the US on a lot of college campuses, and we can talk more about that later.
If I could add one quick one that you might want to actually add a comment. This is Chris feed on this as well. You mentioned jobs. So when I was doing driverless semi-trucks several years ago, when we first started, we were about 40,000 drivers short in the United States. A couple of years ago, we were about 80,000 drivers short, just for long-haul kind of trucking operations. And now we're bridging at about 120,000 drivers short. So we already have a driver shortage happening in long-haul logistics. We've also had a number of jobs that were created for short haul that don't pay a lot of money, and companies sometimes are taking advantage of the workers. They're basically labor arbitrage businesses. And so when we think of these new technologies, we're not necessarily trying to take jobs away from people. We're trying to make up for a labor shortage and maybe hire the person who is going to take the end courier job, have them come work with us in an ops center, who can actually pay them more money because now they're a much more efficient employee. If you're actually supervising 5 vehicles instead of only driving 1, for example, I can actually pay you a lot more money because you're a much more productive employee. So I think long term for us, we don't see these technologies as something that people should see as an impact for jobs. It's a way to create new jobs and new opportunities. And then for the places where you really need the physical human in the vehicle, that would be the premium solution, and they should be paid a fair wage for doing that too.
And you talked about the last 5 to 10 feet, right? One of the other questions is, does it go inside? Can it come up? I'm on the 12th floor. It's like, no, we don't open doors yet. There's no arm on the robot. Doors are difficult. Elevators are notoriously expensive to integrate. I'm sure some of you have seen a robot in a hotel, but they're very hard, very expensive. So sure, would we love for a robot to drive in through the doggy door and take a special elevator and come to your door? Sure, that's kind of a ways away. So that last 5 to 10 feet is, hey, come downstairs to the door. Just come meet the robot. It'll be right there, I promise.
Well, yeah, I don't say that to criticize. I just say that to say that there is space for all solutions. I think, in my opinion, there's no one is right, one is wrong. It's more like understand what your audience is, understand what your target audience is, and there's no one size fits all. There's a lot of geographic characteristics that you need to take into consideration. I think in hilly cities, maybe I'd be curious to hear how the robots work in more hilly areas, or if there's a lot of rain, and there's a lot of considerations. Again, all of these considerations also go towards how couriers operate. So I think there's an integration opportunity here.
Yeah, actually, all of you have mentioned that there needs to be niche solutions for very niche problems. But really quick, I know we have to go soon. I do want to hear about the regulation aspect of that. If there's a 3-wheeler, if there's a robot, if there's a 15-wheeler, I don't know, how do you guys have to work with governments to regulate all that? And at a certain point, does it become too complicated for a government to be figuring out how this 15-wheeler is supposed to work on this specific road versus another thing? I don't know, can you guys speak to that?
I'll say, because I've got one of the lunatic fringes of vehicles that we operate on with the 3-wheelers. There is a little bit of a startup hack in that when we first started with the 3-wheel systems, because they are technically regulated as motorcycles. Less than 4 wheels, NHTSA considers a motorcycle. More than 2 wheels, you don't get a motorcycle license in many states. This allowed us to move quicker as a startup company, and not only was the vehicle right-sized, but I could also get the full speeds on the highway. So technically a 3-wheel motorcycle can still do 75 miles an hour on the highway, totally fine. If we used the little 4-wheel vehicles, you would spend a lot of time lobbying government and regulators to allow you to run a small mini car on the road. So you get all the problems of building a full-size car, and you're not really getting the benefits. That's why I think regulations in the US need to change for alternative vehicle formats to be successful. But a few of us are finding ways to thread the needle on that. But at the same time, we want to work with regulators on having rules for how we run the autonomous systems. Because the more it gets consistent, the more we can actually hold people to the best standards and make sure it's done safe and reliably. But I still think there's room for creativity without doing things too insane. So our vehicles are all street legal, they have license plates, VIN numbers, and everything else, but they are technically motorcycles.
From my perspective, it's time, talent, money to unlock these municipalities. And then earlier I spoke about partnership. So is the word blocker the right word? I mean, there are some cities that can be a blocker, and that's the fact. And you've got to approach those in a little bit of the hand-to-hand, how do we partner? And if this has so much value, well then we should be able to get over that hump. So to me, it's a little bit of a helping the technology companies that are trying to bring this, not get into the, I think, tech bro apocalypse that was mentioned earlier, of everyone's throwing every robot on the sidewalk. I think a lot of people have had some question about that. So it's being a good partner, being a good actor, and developing those relationships.
No, I would absolutely echo that. Partnership, developing those relationships. We are regulated, like I said, at the state and the federal level, a very robust and strong regulatory regime with very focused requirements and expectations, as well as that real partnership at the local level, again, around our scaling, around our commitments to the cities that we're in. So it is that partnership, it is adhering to that regulatory landscape and being good players and good actors.
Great. We do have to stop here. I do highly encourage you guys to talk to the panelists if you have any individual questions. But thank you all so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.